Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha. I'm a software engineer here at Ellevate Network, and I'm your host for today. Thank you for joining us for this session of Mobilize Women Week. Mental health, it's okay not to be okay. Mobilize Women is a movement based on Ellevate Network's purpose of achieving equality for all. We work towards equality by giving diverse voices, and particularly those of women, a seat at the table where decisions are made. Today, we believe in highlighting those voices, opinions, and stories is even more important now than ever. Because of the times we're living through right now, we couldn't host our usual in-person summit, so we put together, perhaps even better, week-long virtual experience. For those of you not familiar with Ellevate, we're a coalition of ambitious, supportive women and allies who show up for each other and mobilize to change the culture of business. We believe that no matter what your goals are or what challenges you're facing, having people you can turn to is invaluable. Throughout this week-long experience, you'll first have a chance to engage in candid discussions with some of today's most thought-provoking leaders. Then through our signature events, you'll get a chance to meet and develop relationships with other people who, like you, want to use their power and influence of equality. Because our community is the largest of its kind, we know that navigating a sea of faceless connections is a waste of time. That's why we will always prioritize creating the real, authentic relationships that can make a difference in the future. We do that by making sure all of our programming, from our local in-person events, our 12-week squad programs, to our virtual events, are meant to provide you with the opportunity to meet and grow relationships with those who can help, all while brushing up on topics that are relevant to you. Today, Mobilize Women is no exception. Our capstone event lies at the center of our mission. It's through Mobilize Women that we take the time to reflect on our own journey, commit to making a mark on our own workplaces, and to using our voices and power across the community at large. After all, change doesn't happen magically, so it's up to all of us. During today's session, we will be joined by incredible speakers, and there will be time for them to answer your questions at the end. So a few key tips to keep in mind during the session. Please use the chat to engage with each other and our speakers. Quote cool things you hear to amplify the message. Drop helpful links to life-changing books or websites or apps, etc. We're all one big community, so show up and get connected. Also post your questions in the Q&A box for the moderator to see, and as I've mentioned in the chat as well, click the closed captions icon to toggle them on and off. And if need be, you can privately message the Ellevate team. We're identifiable as the host and co-host of the session and have Ellevate in our names. We are recording the session and streaming to Ellevate's Facebook page. The recording will be posted to the Ellevate site for our members to view as an evergreen source. Through our site, ellevatenetwork.com, you can also sign up and become a free member today. And last but not least, please go to mobilizewomen2020.com to have a true Mobilize Women experience where actions speak louder than words. So with each session, be active, share your pics and posts with each other from your part of the universe, and use hashtag Mobilize Women to share what you're learning. We're big, we're global, but we're always in this together. So thanks for tuning in. And now, without further ado, please welcome Dr. Amita Kailanchandran. She is a physician and writer. Roni Frank, the co-founder and head of clinical services of Talkspace. Dr. Nicole K. Mack, co-founder and CEO of Black Wellness Corp. And Dr. Linda Freed, Dean and Mailman, School of Public Health at Columbia University. And so we will begin and kick this over to Dr. Amita.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So according to Mental Health America, 1 in 5 people will suffer from mental health illness in their lifetime. And everyone faces challenges at some point that will impact their mental health. So with the current coronavirus pandemic, the racial justice movement, and general uncertainty in the world, many of us are experiencing feelings of stress, fear, anxiety, and isolation. And according to an April 2020 study by Mindshare Partners, 42 respondents reported a decline in mental health since the pandemic began. And just last week, the Centers for Disease Control released a report based on a survey of over 5,400 adults that found that young adults, racial minorities, and essential workers have reported disproportionately worse mental health outcomes, higher substance abuse, suicidal thoughts, and anxiety and depression, which is 3 to 4 times higher than usual. So we have a great panel today with thought leaders from different arenas in mental health and well-being. So we're very excited to have you all join us today. And kicking this off, I'm going to start with a question for Roni. So Roni, you co-founded Talkspace, which is an online platform for therapy after being inspired on both the side of the personal side and your academic interests with your master's in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. And so far, Talkspace has helped over 1.5 million people connect with licensed therapists. What changes or trends have you seen with Talkspace since the pandemic, as well as the racial justice movement, has occurred over the past few months, and along with the corresponding lockdowns that began in March?
So hi everyone, and thank you for having me. So, about 6 months ago, we all started dealing with coronavirus pandemic. And since then, anxiety and depression have heightened dramatically. Talkspace therapists share that they have never seen such level of fear ever before, a really overwhelming level of anxiety. Our client base at Talkspace has doubled since then. Now, in terms of what our clients are dealing with, the trends that we see on the platform, in the beginning of COVID, we saw a significant spike in medical workers and first responders on the front lines, a lot of doctors, nurses on the front lines dealing with so much burnout and fear, pain in the hospital as they're trying to keep it together. And, they were reaching out for support at Talkspace. We also saw a lot of people, and again, in the beginning of COVID, a lot of people that either they or their loved ones suffer from underlying health conditions such as heart issues, diabetes, cancer, all chronic illnesses that cause you to be more susceptible to COVID-19. And this fear leads to panic attacks, insomnia, and more. Many of our clients are extremely anxious now about losing their job, or they already lost their job. Losing your income, losing your livelihood causes so much stress and anxiety, and of course also panic. Unemployment also means loss of identity for many people, loss of connections with colleagues. And there's also stigma about being unemployed. So this economic crisis takes a huge toll on our mental health. Now, with quarantines and social distancing, working from home, all of this is very isolating, mainly for people who live alone. And even before COVID, loneliness was a big issue for many people, for many Americans. But now with social distancing, this is becoming a real epidemic that, again, takes a toll on our mental health. We also see a lot of couples on the platform. Relationship under quarantine is a huge stressor as well. Many couples are really struggling now. They're fighting more, and at the same time, they're also dealing with kids at home, online school, a lot of stress, and it takes a toll on the relationship and on the whole family. We also see now a lot of single parents who are dealing with kids and school, cooking, working from home, everything at the same time, and without any childcare. They are really struggling. And unfortunately, we also see uptick in domestic violence, which is pretty devastating. Last but not least, a lot of people are just grieving the loss of normalcy, the loss of freedom, the loss of joy, which can turn into depression. We have lost control over so many aspects of our lives, and we don't know when and if it's going to end and what would be the new normal. So, we're dealing with a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty. And last but not least, about 6 weeks ago, we started seeing increase on the platform coming from the Black community, and mainly after the horrible event with George Floyd. A lot of people from the Black community and other minorities started reaching out for help, for support, as they dealt with so much anxiety due to all those horrible events. And as a result, we, of course, we were looking to diversify more our network of therapists, because many of those consumers were looking for Black therapies or specific other therapies that we didn't have enough, and as a result, we really diversify our network to meet those needs. So yeah, we see a lot of trends, and I share the main points, I think.
Great, thank you, Roni. That leads really well actually into my next question, which is for Dr. Nicole Kamak. So as a co-founder and CEO of Black Mental Wellness Corp, as well as a licensed clinical psychologist, you've been dedicated specifically to providing resources and information about mental health and well-being from a Black perspective. Since the pandemic and this reinvigorated racial justice movement began this spring, what have you noticed in terms of the needs among the general population, as well as specifically among populations of color and Black clients and patients? You had mentioned in the past about this feeling of safety and challenges around feeling safe to go out during this time. So can you expand upon what you've been noticing?
Sure. I think, Roni, you summed it up perfectly in terms of like, what are all of the things we're seeing that have increased since March? And it's been interesting because starting out, I remember in March, even when I reached out to patients, they were like, oh, I'm okay, I don't need to come in. And then there was just this flooding. And Roni sort of summed up what a lot of that was. I think what ended up happening on top of that is as the, sort of like you said, what did you say? Something you said, but something you said, yes, it sort of stuck out to me because what ended up happening was when all of those racial injustices were like highlighted at the same time, and there were 3 back to back, right? What happened is that there was also this uptick in people seeking services related to racial stressors, racial trauma, and things like that. And so what we saw, which in a lot of ways, you're dealing with a community who were already disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And now on top of that, you have these racial injustices. And it wasn't just what was seen in the news and what was played over and over, but it was also like that re-traumatizing, that re-experiencing, that connection to those personal experiences. So hearing a lot of, I went through this, or, you know, I've had these type of specific experiences and no one believed me. Or having that belief, but then still feeling like nothing happened. And then there are also people where maybe it didn't happen to you directly, but it happened to a friend, it happened to a family member. And then there's the fear of the what if, that could be me, that could be my child, that could be my husband, my brother. And so there being this just increase of seeking support, seeking some place to talk about those feelings. And oftentimes, you know, we think about the stigma in the Black community and people may not want to seek services. And so something that, I mean, I'm not happy in terms of what we're dealing with, but happy to see the increase of people in the Black community seeking mental health services during these times, which just speaks to there are changes happening with that stigma. But something that has come up, I work with veterans, and something that we did immediately was we pulled together like this race-based trauma group. We already had the group in works actually, and then COVID hit and we had to like end everything. And then there was a moment where it was like, wait, we need to figure out how to do this virtually. And something that continuously came up both in that group and with individuals was, I don't feel safe. And so you're dealing with these feelings of not being safe with COVID-19 already. And there's sort of that hypervigilance around that. But then it's like, I can't guarantee if I leave that house, if my husband leave that house, my children leave that house, that we're safe. And so something that I actually learned in another talk that I was doing that a therapist used is she calls it brave spaces. So it may be that you don't feel safe, but where are those spaces that you can feel brave and still feel comfortable, I guess, to the best of your ability in that environment. And so a lot of it was just working with people with If you don't feel safe going out right now, how do we get you? Can you go to your patio? Can you go outside? Where do you feel safe in your neighborhood? Are there people in your family that some people may be, close to family or still visiting parents or helping out? So if that is your safe space, or your brave space, can you extend it in that way? And then the other thing, really just focusing on where is your community and how can you make those intentional connections? Because a lot of times as you're going through these things, you may hold them in or you may not be talking about it with other people. So how do you sort of think about your community and those people who you can talk about it with and process it with, and sort of figure out how do we get through this together, because it's not just one thing. And that community can be anyone, right? Those can be your allies, those could be your family, your friends, whomever you feel comfortable having those discussions. And one other thing that I've talked to people about, or that people have found helpful, is really thinking about what are the ways that we can all make an impact and a change. And so a lot of times there's those feelings of hopelessness. And then it just feels like we're always dealing with this and it's never going to change. But then there are also those instances where it's like, okay, I can make a change by, how I address diversity and supporting people within my job. Or if we're looking at how do we, at my job specifically, we started to have these discussions about how do we both support our staff in helping them to process what they're dealing with and to feel comfortable in the workspace, but also how do we provide these resources to the people that we serve. And so I feel like there's so many different angles where we can all make an impact. And like, that is another thing where it feels like you don't have control in this big situation, but maybe here are the pieces that you can have that control.
That's great, thank you. So Dr. Linda Freed, you have the unique vantage point of being trained in epidemiology, geriatric medicine, and now serving as the Dean of Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health in a city, New York, which has been an epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic in the US. So from a mental health point of view, what have you noticed in terms of the needs mental health-wise as they relate to COVID, both in the New York City area and more broadly around the US?
Well, thank you, Amitha, and thank you, Ronnie and Nicole, for those great comments. This is a big deal, and so I agree with what everybody said. I think the first place to start is that there's no difference in New York, I think, from what people are experiencing elsewhere in the US and even around the world. But I think it's very important to recognize that this level of stress and distress that people are feeling is a normal response to a highly abnormal situation. And the lack of feeling of safety, which many people are feeling, is real. I think the thing that I find important to unpack are the different dimensions of the stress and distress, and both Nicole and Ronnie have spoken to some of those dimensions, which I agree, many of them, so I won't repeat them. But I think, first of all, there is a huge set of threats because people are feeling precarious in ways that they did not feel precarious before. Precarious in terms of job, in terms of do I have enough money to live, precarious in terms of can I get food, will I lose my home? Those are very serious and real problems, and we, in general, in normal times, which we're not in the US at the moment, we look to leadership to bring us together and to feel the collective will to solve the problems that are affecting so many of us. One of the things that has exacerbated this sense of unsafety and precariousness is the lack of consistent leadership that we're seeing in the US, so that to ask us all to be aligned and to put in place the measures that diminish real precariousness. That's a serious challenge to well-being at so many levels, which requires being addressed, and it forces the individual and us in communities to have to solve problems that some of which we might have control over, but not all of them. So, you know, another dimension of this, of course, is loneliness. And I think that loneliness is a feeling. It's a very painful feeling. And it's a pain of not having satisfying connections, which goes over and above feeling isolated. In other words, not seeing another person is isolation. Loneliness has several dimensions which affect mental health. One of them, of course, is the loneliness of grief. And in COVID and in the racist murders that we have been experiencing, there is a lot of grief and loss. People are losing family members, spouses, and that's another threat to our mental well-being, which is very real. The second is certainly the difficulty for many people in connecting with others who you care about, family and friends, either because you don't have internet connectivity in a world at the moment where that's the best way to connect, or because you have someone in the hospital who you love and you can't see them. That actually creates another kind of mental health threat, which we would call moral distress, which is very painful. And finally, there's a different kind of loneliness, which is when you feel like nobody cares about you in society, that you don't have value in society, and the way this is rolling out says that, but also that you don't have a way to connect in to make a difference. One deep human need is to feel like part of a collective where we can solve together the things we can't solve alone. And that's another kind of loneliness, when you don't have a way in to be part of the collective solutions, and we're having trouble finding them at the moment, not always, but in many situations, particularly because of the lack of national leadership in the US that is consistent and tells people really what the best answers are and we can line up behind. But the last thing I'll say just is an anecdote, which is that if you talk to many older adults, many are having less trouble with this than young people are. And one of the reasons is that they say, either I've been through harder things before, honey, or I'm staying in my home to protect everybody else. So this is an act of altruism that I am here. And we have to take care of each other. We have to wear masks because it's an act of mutual protection. That actually helps mental health hugely, to know why you're doing something and in a way that connects us to each other.
That's great. So Dr. Fried, so just on that, that leads really nicely into my next question. So maybe we can start with you, Dr. Fried, and Nicole and Roni can add to it. So as you mentioned, you were talking about loneliness, and for years we've heard that social media can actually be quite harmful to our well-being, and part of it might have to do with loneliness and the impact of screen time in general. So Dr. Fried, what is your understanding of this, and have there been any benefits during this time to interacting with our screens, interacting with social media at a time when many people do feel quite lonely?
So I guess I'll start by just telling you what the data were before COVID. Before COVID, the data were starting to be pretty clear that the benefits of being on social media, of connectivity, varied very much by your age. Adolescents, teenagers, and young adults have some very strong positives and some very strong negatives from connectivity. In fact, if you use technology to connect with people you already know, who you have a relationship with, it's quite positive and reinforcing. But if you're using technology and social media primarily to connect with people you don't know. For young adults, that can be quite stressful and even create a deep loneliness, which is a problem. I'm summarizing a lot of literature, perhaps in a somewhat simplistic way, but those are some of the take-home points. On the other hand, for older adults, technology is pretty consistently a positive thing. The data are almost unequivocal that technology is a connector, whether it's to information, things going on in your community or people you love, and increasingly it's an opportunity to connect with people you didn't even know. Even if you look at online dating, older adults are huge users of online dating. And 20% of older adults in the US say they know somebody who is in a relationship through online dating. But also, you know, there are many kinds of loneliness. And as I was saying, some is the loneliness of not having an intimate relationship. Some of it is the loneliness of not having meaningful connections with family and friends. And for older adults and for younger adults, I think that's very positive and important. And then there's the loneliness of not being able to connect to society in a way that you feel like a major significant contributor. Technology can help on all of those, but it depends on how we use it.
I'd like to add a few words about teenagers and social media. You know, we launched Talkspace, I would say Talkspace for Teens, we call it, in 2018. This offering allows minors ages 13 to 18 to use the platform with a guardian's consent. Now, teenagers are dealing with a lot of mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, body image issues. However, research studies show that in the last few years, there is a sharp increase in mental health issues among teens, and it's correlated to social media use. Data shows that teenagers are using social media 9 hours a day, 9 hours a day. And they are engaged mainly with comparing themselves to thousands of people that are connected to through social media, which you can imagine leads to anxiety and depression and other mental health issues. Our therapists are working with those teenagers, or also college students, young adults, who are first literally addicted to social media, and second, use it in a way that is destructive for them or unhealthy for them. And they're trying to help them, you know, how to limit their use, how to use it in a way that is more constructive and less destructive.
Okay. And Nicole, have you noticed anything with your organization as it relates to connecting online, especially during this time? Have you noticed any positives, for instance, with social media use or connecting online?
Yeah, so I guess one way in knowing that, especially even with the teenagers, I didn't realize it was 9 hours a day, but with knowing how social media can also serve as like this negative world for a lot of people because of the comparisons, because, you know, you're looking at someone and thinking, I want this, or, you know, things aren't going as well in my life and things like that. What we've started to do is just work with people about how do you make those intentional connections. And so how do you connect with your family and friends in a more intentional way where we're all forced to use like screen time more than maybe we may want to, even just because of work and meetings and all of those other components. But how do you set up those meaningful connections? So families have talked about, you know, doing virtual game nights. So a little off of social media, but just how do you still, you know, stay in contact and feel like you're a part of it? How do you do a bingo from afar? How do you set up some family traditions via virtual means? And so really encouraging people to even think about, you know, we're always saying social distancing, but more about we want you to remain social. How do you maintain that physical distancing? And so in a lot of ways, I think that's been helpful for people. Another thing that I think has come out that's been positive is that a lot of organizations, just like with this event, have been able to pivot and provide these forums and places where people can learn and hear from different speakers that maybe they would not have had the opportunity to because of travel and all of the other limitations. And so knowing, like, when I hear about things, it's like, okay, well, here's a nice program you can go and listen to that may be relevant to that. And then another thing is, even on Facebook, some fitness instructors may host like a live class. So it's like, maybe you're on Facebook, you're working out, they can't necessarily see you, but it can still feel like you're connected and you're working out. So really, it's been like a lot of creative thinking about how do we use these things that are already there in a more positive way, and so that you can feel connected even when you're not in that same space.
Amitha, may I add something else? First of all, I can't resist saying that one of the best anti-stress pills is physical activity. So exercising really matters. But the other is that one of the dangers of what's going on is intergenerational blame. When in fact, this is a moment when we need each other very much. So blaming older people for the economy has no factual basis, period. But it creates intergenerational anger. And, you know, I'll just give you one anecdote to try and counter the emotions of it. We paired college students and graduate students at the end of March with older adults in New York and had them talk to each other by phone twice a week. They didn't know each other before that. And what we found was that both sides, both age groups, said they benefited so much, and in fact formed friendships that are going to go forward. But particularly the college students and graduate students said that it was a lifeline for them to talk to older people who, you know, could take this in stride, who could put this in perspective compared to other things that have happened in their lives, to talk about the altruism of what they were doing. That we, you know, they all the younger adults said that they benefited from just the love and compassion and the balance, the normalizing balance that they got, as well as the advice from older people. So I think we need to recognize that we can help each other in very small but completely important ways.
Can I add something? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I'll go after you.
Just something that you said that stood out to me, even when, like at the height of all of the racial injustices and all of that, some of the conversations that started happening in my therapy sessions was about that generational healing and how you have, you know, parents and grandparents who have been a part of movements, or maybe there were things that they tried or that they found success in, and how do you start to have those conversations together? Because there were some families where it was like, you know, a grandfather, a son, a grandson, and then having those same life experiences and being like, wow, what a missed opportunity that the three of you don't come together and talk about that and talk about healing together versus each, you know, of you dealing with that separately. And it really was, even for me, like a first time of being intentional about like, oh, we need to talk about this generational connection and how do we get back to that, because there's power in that connection. So to hear you say that, I'm like, yes.
So yeah, I'm a huge believer in community, and we also at Talkspace we launched Facebook groups for any person who wants to join. They're topic based, so we have a group for parents, group for people who are in relationships that need support. We have group for the, you know, Black community, and those groups are led by our professional therapists. They're free for every person in need. And it allows not only to get tips and advice from professional licensed therapists, but also to get this sense of community and the sense of, you know, we're going to do it together, which is so important at times of crisis. However, you know, I do want to talk a little bit about access to mental health care, to work with a professional therapist, because, you know, for some mental health issues and for some people, they need higher level of care, and those community groups wouldn't be enough. So, as I said, I want just to talk a little bit about access to mental health care, which is so important in terms of receiving professional help. As I said in the beginning, the Talkspace's mission is to make therapy and psychiatry accessible and affordable for all. Now, a big part of making therapy accessible and psychiatry is getting it covered by employers and insurance companies. So people don't need to pay it out of pocket, because cost is the biggest barrier. Cost is the biggest barrier for receiving professional help. Now, in the last couple of years at Talkspace, we started working with both insurance companies and employers, so they offer Talkspace to their employees or to their members. Example, we recently launched our new partnership with Cigna Insurance. Cigna joins many of the nation's largest health insurance who have in-network agreements with Talkspace. And I must say, it's very encouraging to see more and more employers providing mental health benefits for their employees. Google, for example, is one of our clients, as well as many other employers. What happened is that employers started realizing that the success of their companies depends on the mental strengths and wellness of their employees. Mental health accounts for 30% of disability costs and $100 billion per year in lost worker productivity. And even more important, this is about employers doing their part and offering help and support for their employees. I'm proud to say that Talkspace is currently covering over 40 million lives, Americans that get Talkspace therapy through their employers, or it's covered by their insurance companies.
Great, thank you. Some really great points there. I mean, yes, cost absolutely is a huge barrier. And I loved what was discussed around building community and the intergenerational impact of building meaning and community. I think we've seen a lot of that, especially with the racial justice movement, with people like Angela Davis, John Lewis coming out, and sort of this shared mission and meaning, which really gets to what Linda was talking about in terms of creating this sort of purpose during these moments of challenge. So we just talked about one of the barriers being cost. So another big barrier is stigma and bias. So a lot of populations, particularly racialized populations, women, older adults, those who have issues accessing care from a financial standpoint, have a lot of barriers in terms of accessing care. So what are your thoughts? And maybe we can start with Nicole here in terms of how moving more to an online space, which a lot of people have had to do during this time where we have to be physically distancing, has moving to accessing resources and therapy online helped in terms of this bias and maybe also the stigma? And do you think that this is something that we'll continue to see as a pattern moving forward even after the pandemic?
Yes, I think it's interesting because it was maybe about a year or two ago, there was an article, and I don't remember where I read it, but I just remember that it talked about for Black women, teletherapy was on the rise, and that it was partially like it allowed for convenience, right? Being able to fit it into the schedule. But the other part of that was that it reduced that stigma of going into an office. And so I think that in a lot of ways, teletherapy does that for people, right? Even with the people who I've noticed, like who maybe, and I'm in DC and it's like rush hour all day here. And there would be people, like if you're dealing with anxiety, and particularly anxiety around, and I work with veterans, so like a lot of times things are triggered while driving. Like people would be at a heightened state just to get to the appointment, and then it doesn't feel good to get there. So it's like, there's no way I'm dealing with that. And then noticing that when I talk to people and they're at home and they're in an environment that feels safer to them, or where they feel more comfortable, or they don't have the stigma of going into an office, of waiting in a waiting room, of feeling, like all of those things that come up, that people feel, it seems like they feel more comfortable in a lot of ways at home. I would imagine that this is going to open the door for a lot of people who have have sought treatment during this time. So even if it starts out with something that you're only using and accessing in these virtual means, that maybe it opens the door to say, oh, I can go and see someone, or I can have that conversation with my friends about what my therapy experience was. Because a lot of times, even for those people, and I'm not going to say like everyone, but there are a lot of people, a lot of Black people that I work with, that even when they come to therapy, there's a stigma in the room. So a lot of people think, oh, you just get there and now you're good. No, that's not what happens. What happens is, even when they come to the session, there is like all of the shame about even needing to be there. There is this guilt about, you know, what they should be able to do, or it's even done in secret for a lot of people, just meaning, you know, they may say, well, I only told this person that I'm coming to therapy. And so I think that as people start to have these very reaffirming experiences with therapy, that as they have these positive outcomes, as they feel more empowered, that maybe, and even if it starts with this teletherapy as the means, that maybe they start to have those conversations with their friends and opening it up. And those are ways that we further reduce the stigma.
Great. So my next question is a little bit of a different kind of a question. So several years ago, two sociologists named Ross and Nisbet wrote this textbook called The Person and the Situation. So in that textbook, they make a very compelling sociological argument for the idea that our personality and our behavior isn't fixed and is very dependent on our environments and situations and our context. So naturally, it made me think of the time that we're living in now with the pandemic and the racial justice movement. So in your view, and maybe we can start with Linda here, is the pandemic and everything else that's happening around us right now really challenging how we view mental health challenges in terms of the role of situational factors, and maybe that they play a larger role than most of us presume? So in other words, it's not just in our heads or not just a brain chemistry issue. And if you think so, is this an opportunity to think deeply about what types of approaches we might be thinking about as we emerge from this pandemic to more holistically address mental well-being?
So the answer is yes. We need to do that. And if there are a number of opportunities of the very traumatic things that have gone on in the last 6 months. If we can recognize the opportunities and come out of this in a way that actually we do build a society that is more able to support care and caring, we'll all be better. There are a lot of ways to think about that, from I think even, you know, in New York City in the last few years, there's been a move to create mental health first aid for mental health protection. But we probably could also build mental health promotion, just as you will both, Nicole and Ronnie are really, I believe, doing, is creating an infrastructure and services for mental health protection and promotion. How do we build that into our communities? You know, not just for serious mental illness, but for the stresses of our lives, which this will not be our last pandemic. This will not be in the face of climate change, where, you know, hopefully we will learn how to diminish its serious impacts. We have to. But there are going to be a lot of traumas, and we have to learn how to support, how to build in supports for the individual, but how to build community and collective spirit and action to be able to not feel so alone. Those are critical. There's lots of other discussions going on right now about how to build for a future. Some of them sound like nothing about mental health. For example, how do we build back the economy in a way that puts people's well-being and our planet's well-being at the center rather than the margin? It's possible to do this. We could invest in the businesses that will support all of us thriving, that will support resilience rather than, an almost intolerable level of stress for people. We could do this together. We could imagine
Can I share a few words? Okay. So I think first we're touching a very important topic and a big barrier. Stigma is a big barrier. It's the second barrier after cost. So that's why I talk about costs in terms of like we're tackling via, opening access through employers and insurance companies. And stigma is something that we're of course trying to address as well. And it's part of our mission. I have to say that since pandemic started, we do see that the stigma has decreased. And we're seeing it in many ways. One of the places that I really see that is on the Facebook group that we have launched. In the past, we always use Facebook groups after like traumatic event or natural disaster, mass shooting. This is the first time that we are launching a Facebook group, and first, there is such level of engagement, 5,000 participants. But more importantly, people really open up. People really share. People share about everything, about their childhood trauma and about their psychiatric medications that they're taking. And they're so open and so supportive. It's actually very inspiring to kind of follow those groups. But this is the first time that I see that people who are on Facebook, so they're not anonymous, right? You can see exactly who they are on Facebook, really open up and share about their mental health struggles. Now, we're doing at Talkspace a lot of things to address stigma and to tackle stigma. I would say that our biggest initiative is to partner with Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps is our partner and spokesperson for the company. And the reason we have partnered with Michael Phelps, I don't know if you're all aware that he opened up about his own depression and anxiety in 2014, I think he started opening up. And the reason why it's so powerful, because you're talking about the biggest athlete of all time, someone who is considered like very masculine and very strong and an amazing athlete. And if someone like him, share about his own struggles and about his own anxiety and his own depression, and he's always saying, like, his line is, "It's okay not to be okay." That's very inspiring for people. That makes people feel, oh, if he can feel anxious, it's probably okay that I feel anxious as well. So he's in a way legitimizing and normalizing mental health. And I can share with you that after we launched this partnership 2 years ago, and after we launched it, we saw a huge spike on the platform in terms of people reaching out for help. So we're doing a lot of things to kind of normalize therapy and make people feel more comfortable with. One of the things we're doing is just pushing the conversation all the time, over and over again, through a lot of PR and a lot of events and conferences. Like, I think the most important thing is just keep talking about mental health care, about our struggles. Just make people feel comfortable talking about those issues and hearing those issues. That's key for solving the stigma, I believe.
Great, thanks, Roni. So over the weekend, there was a great op-ed in the New York Times by psychiatrist Richard Friedman, where he argues that perhaps we're over-pathologizing mental health issues, and maybe there's a good proportion of us right now who are feeling bored more than anything. So that got me thinking about this idea of solitude and how solitude compares to loneliness. And just the fact that we have fewer distractions now. And so perhaps there are some benefits to that. There's been some interesting arguments that have been made around after the killing of George Floyd, how the response was quite strong in part because we had fewer distractions and we could actually be more present and fully aware of the injustice. So could there be an argument that could be made in terms of some of the upsides to having more alone time in terms of the benefits to how we reflect on our own lives, how we reevaluate where each of us are going as individuals, as well as broader society. We're in an election year after all, and so some of our long-term goals and priorities and what truly matters, as well as what Dr. Freed was mentioning earlier in terms of purpose and meaning. So maybe we can start with Nicole there, and then have the other panelists weigh in.
I do think that there is, and I'll say like a large part of who I am serving now are older adults. And that solitude, that loneliness is something that was like an immediate concern, because in a lot of ways, the medical facility serves as a community for a large part of our population. So they come there to seek those connections, and sort of thinking about what does that look like when it's not there. And then also losing a lot of the resources that we would normally think about, just in terms of going to a community center, for example, or, you know, signing up to be a part of this. So for a lot of people, dealing with that loneliness and that solitude sort of led to those feelings of, I'm alone, I don't have anyone, you know, what's the point in getting out of bed? And then there's this spiral. And so again, going back to a lot of times it's just been working with people to see like you're not alone, and what are those ways again that you can make those intentional connections, and also helping people themselves to see the connections between like when you spend, you know, hours most of the day in bed versus when you get up and you have a schedule and you go for a walk in your neighborhood, and evaluating how you feel in those different times. As things are opening up and people are feeling more comfortable, even if it's just to be outside and, you know, walking around the neighborhood, or some people have ventured out and are starting to see family, being able to share that with people, like, how do you do that? Because being alone by yourself hasn't been good. But I do think that for a lot of people, that was like the catalyst to the depression, or even the anxiety, right? That fear. And then you're just sitting there in it by yourself, reminding people to use the technology or to call people, and how to do that. And another thing that came up for a lot of the older people that I work with, which I am very proud of them at the same time, is that we're talking about all of this technology. And for some people, that wasn't a part of their everyday life. So we're like, oh, just video your family, or, you know, get on, and people may not feel comfortable with that. So how do we have that, you know, space to just say, well, what are some other ways of connections? Or how do we help you figure out how to use it? So even with telehealth, a lot of the veterans I work with in the beginning were like, no, you can just call me. And then it's like, well, there's some power to seeing someone, even if it's through the computer, having that face-to-face maybe, especially as you're worried about those people who are by themselves. And then it's like, how about I call you and then I can walk you through it, so it doesn't feel like this big intimidating thing. So for some people, being able to assess what that is, you know, like what are the barriers even with the technology?
Yeah, so Dr. Freed, those are some really good points, Nicole. So Dr. Freed, you had mentioned loneliness earlier. So just wondering if you have any specific thoughts in terms of, could there be some upsides to the solitude aspect of it, or the reflection element of having fewer distractions as it relates to our mental health?
So a lot of people are writing about the positive side of solitude, and the fact that it might be desirable to relearn in our crazy frenetic world how to find that positive side. The positive side of really being comfortable in oneself and having a chance to just find your balance and think deeply and reflect. That brings out creativity. All of those things are very important. I think that I don't know any data to say whether people are using this pandemic to achieve solitude they didn't previously have. Maybe someone else knows data on that. It certainly would be a good opportunity. I think the challenge, and I'm someone who actually likes that kind of solitude, The challenge is whether it's optional or not, or enforced, I would imagine. And if the stress of all the things you're worrying about, including will I have enough food, just very basic survival things, can get in the way of enjoying the solitude. So I don't know whether people are benefiting from it. Certainly many people who are working, and I'm no exception, are on Zoom so many hours a day that it can be hard to achieve any solitude. It would be good.
I want to say a few words. So for me, and I think also it's relevant for other people, the best way to cope, and I'm not talking just about solitude now, just the best way to cope during these crazy times is, to really think what we can learn from this crisis. Like, what is the lesson? This is such a dramatic, unprecedented global crisis that I feel like we have to learn something from it. It must change our perspective. It must change the way we live. And right now, I feel that it's back to basics and back to what really matters, like the most meaningful things in life. So, for example, I'm more mindful now about my family, about my husband and my 2 girls, about my health, and of course, my family's health, about dinners. All of a sudden, I'm eating dinners with my girls every single night. And there's something very beautiful about it, and something that I realized that I haven't done in the last 10 years since I started Talkspace, because I was always too busy and always on the go. So I feel like we have to learn to appreciate the most simple things and find joy in them. And it's a reminder about what really matters, what are our values. And, going back to the beginning of the conversation, we also realize that we are all so vulnerable, and we need to come together now and support one another. It teaches us about the importance of community and support systems, and about the value of human connection. Like, we really need to come together now and find creative ways to support each other. And it's a great lesson for all of us.
Great. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I really love, I think Roni and Nicole, both of you used, I think, the word lessons and catalyzing things. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Obviously, this pandemic has catalyzed a lot of mental health challenges in people. It's also catalyzed for a lot of people just a deeper search for meaning and purpose. And I really liked what Dr. Fried had mentioned around, whether it's forced solitude versus not. And that also gets into just this idea, and there's no data for it, of whether introverts are having an easier time versus extroverts. So these are all really interesting questions that hopefully someone will look at the data around. So to end just my portion of this, it's a 3-parter, so you might want to write these down, but this is for each of you. So what surprised you most about your own mental health during this time, including whether you felt more resilient or you realized you were less resilient? How do each of you manage your mental health and well-being? What are maybe 1 or 2 core things that you do every day or on a frequent basis to manage your mental health and well-being? And then thirdly, what keeps you hopeful during this time? So we can start with, we'll start with Roni.
Okay. First, I'm on the platform. For me, it's very helpful to be connected with a therapist, and I'm doing it all my life. Apart from it, I'm doing yoga every day, and that's very helpful for me. And I'm doing a lot of things around self-care, really taking time to kind of decompress and relax, and to do things that are just like that I'm enjoying. I learned over the years, it's so important. Even before COVID, I experienced burnout when I started Talkspace after like 3 years, and I was in a very, very bad place. Like, I didn't eat well, I didn't sleep well, I was working every day until 2 a.m. 2 a.m. I slept 4 hours and continued working. And to the point that I started to be very sick. So I learned how important it is to kind of take care of yourself and to prioritize self-care. And, you know, when I talk with founders or entrepreneurs that are sharing with me about, you know, their burnout and their struggles, I always tell them, like, you have to take care of yourself. Nobody is going to do that for you. No one. This is my biggest lesson. So you have to find ways to kind of relax and do other things and balance yourself. So yeah, therapy, yoga, some kind of meditation, time with my girls is very important for me. I have two girls, 14 and 12, and I'm very happy to be more at home now with them. So yeah, stuff like that.
Nicole, do you want to go next?
Something that surprised me, I don't know if it was I needed a break. And so I think I was one of those people, Roni, I didn't work to 2 a.m., but I worked a lot and I was always running around. And what I noticed is like, I would get up at 5:30 and my whole day would be go, 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 go. And then I would get, you know, home and it's cook and it's, you know, eat and nighttime routine and do it all over again. And I really needed the break. And I think what it did for me was it allowed me to see the areas where like sometimes you can run so much that you're like, even when I think I'm being present and I meditate or do something, it's like, but just how are you living holistically? And being able to prioritize what's important. Like, oh, I like exactly what you said, Roni. I like that I can cook dinner with my daughter and we eat together and we're not like picking something up on the way from home because of traffic and all of those other things. And so something that I do every day, as long as the weather is nice, is I go outside and I walk. So for me, I know I feel the most grounded when I'm in nature. And so when I go outside, I like to take in what I'm seeing because I'm confined in my condo. So, and I walk with my daughter. So sometimes I get her to get on her scooter so we can go further, but we will do, you know, like just to be able to, and I'll point it out to her like, oh, wow, look at that beautiful butterfly or look at the clouds. But just really being in nature is a calming factor for me. And I know that about myself. And so that's something that I do. I've started working out online. So like, at the VA, we have employee yoga, but now we can do it virtually. But then I joined other groups to do different types of workouts just to give myself a challenge. And then I think the thing that keeps me hopeful is like hearing so many people reconnect back to what helps them feel connected to their family, what's important, where are the values, people looking differently at their jobs, at their purpose. Like that gives me hope because it's like, you know, our lives is never going to go back. There is no going back to normal. We will adjust to whatever is presented now. And so how do we maintain those things that are important? And someone put in the Girl Trek Black History Bootcamp. I actually do that. So Girl Trek has this Black History Bootcamp. I think this is the second month that they're doing it. And each day they sort of like do these walks and the idea is to do them together. I don't do them I listen to the podcast myself, but it's about learning. And for me, it has like that historical connection. So again, feeling empowered. So that's something else. I do that as well.
Dr. Freed?
It's my turn. So a lot of what I'm going to say is going to sound familiar based on what Nicole and Roni have said. I think what surprised me about my own mental health was that there were kind of I've discovered that there are 4 pillars that make me feel okay. One is just, I have deep gratitude. I feel very lucky. You know, so many people are suffering and I feel very lucky. I have a job. My family's healthy. But I think the other things that I discovered are really, really important to my mental health are trees. So I take really long walks at least twice a day, and without those, and just enjoying the trees, I think very, they help me be centered. And the other is, this is not a surprise to me, but it's been reinforced. Obvious things, my family, and just staying connected to feel a network of people who you care about and vice versa. That's really important. But also, you know, having things to get up to that you believe matter, that make make everybody better and that address needs. Those all are kind of different poles of what I've really experienced. Like everybody else, I've managed my own mental health by recognizing those things and by exercising and spending time on cooking, which I have not done in years. But since I was home and the restaurants were closed, I had to, and it's been a pleasure and being with my family. I think the thing that makes me the most hopeful is two things. We have to find the opportunity in this together and build it back together. And so many people are saying that. We have to make it that people don't go through this level of precariousness again. That we there's going to be other situations like this more and more of pandemics and climate change related events. Hopefully we will end the racist murders and violence. We have to, but these other things are less in our volitional decision making, and we have to create a floor so people don't feel like there's this endless free fall that they're subjected to. We have to build back for that, and it makes me hopeful that we're all nodding our head in the vertical direction.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think again, coming back to this term catalyst and coming together as community to really focus, you know, all three of you have talked about your work and your advocacy and you know, making sure that mental health resources are accessible, all of the policy elements to this. I think, you know, it's really a time for all of us to think about our own role in terms of shaping a better society. And we'll end with an audience question. It's directed to Nicole. So we'll start with Nicole, and then if Linda and Roni want to add to it. So the question is from an anonymous attendee. So Nicole, given your experience at the VA, are there any insights or lessons from past war times that would help us navigate the endless uncertainty of the pandemic and associated upheaval? So it's really a question around how do we get our heads wrapped around just not knowing what could happen and uncertainty?
Well, I don't know if let's work, try to walk through the answer. It's been interesting because what's happened with a lot of veterans is that, especially like in the beginning where we were first putting the mask on and all of the grocery stores and how do we do this? For a lot of veterans, it triggered like being in situations where they had those similar feelings. So the last time I felt like this, I was in a combat zone or I was deployed here. What ended up happening for them though is that when you're in that environment, you sort of have like, you know what to do. You know, like what your mission is, you know what to do if something goes the wrong way. And being here, they sort of felt like, I don't have that armor. I don't have those direct orders of what to do. So that's where a lot of the anxiety came up. But something that I think that we can learn from veterans and active duty service members is that there is this strong sense of community in a lot of ways. And like, we're in this mission together, like we're going to figure this out together. And that's the strength of the veterans and why we were even concerned in the beginning with, okay, if the medical center is shut down, where do veterans get that community? Because that's the part of the strength. And so a lot of times when you hear veterans talk about like what the solution is, it's always a we. It doesn't matter like if Nicole figures it out, like it's like, I can't get to the end without you know, my partner, my battle buddy with me. And so, Dr. Freed, exactly what you said, it's about how do we connect those generations? How do we work together? How do we take the knowledge that we all have to navigate the uncertainty? And I'll tell you, even in our race-based trauma group, it was interesting because as people were talking, it was the veterans who were helping each other. This is what I did. This is what helped me. This is what you can do. As a matter of fact, take my number. We're going to connect you. And they knew the resources. And so if we can think about how we're in this together and that moments like this, it sort of makes you realize the importance of those connections that can help us with the right now.
I want to add to what Nicole said, because what I've learned from my experience and from, being Talkspace co-founder for the last 8 years, that at times of crisis, finding purpose, finding meaning, be service for others, it's very, very healing. It's, in fact, the most therapeutic thing you can do for yourself is to find meaning and do something social for others. And that's my recommendation for all the audience. And I must say that what's really helping me now during these unprecedented times is my work, because I feel my work is meaningful. I feel I have purpose. I feel that I'm, engaged with something that is aligned with my values and who I am. And that's very helpful for me to deal with all those challenges.
So I'll just add, I agree totally with what was just said. I'll just add that for us to come out of this with really preparing for the next time this happens so that people don't go through this in the same way, I think we need to think through both what our lessons as individuals are, what we do in our individual life, and now I'm going to speak, Amitha, as a public health person, to recognize what we have to construct together. Because there are many solutions that we can put in place only if we've built the framework together. That's the role of government. It's the role of public-private partnerships. It's the role of communities, but we have to build the enduring social protections that none of us can build alone. But we can only accomplish together. And then we can individually be more successful in the next round. This round has pointed out so many of the weaknesses and flaws, and if we use that to actually come together to say we have to build to solve those things that have been pointed out, then we will actually have taken on the opportunities of this really difficult time.
By the way, someone said something on the chat that I think it's so important to share with everyone. We're doing it once a week. She said that they have a WhatsApp group where everybody says what are 3 things that they're grateful for. And I, this is an amazing tip, for kind of dealing with these challenging times. We're doing it in our family, like every Saturday, every family member says like 3 things that they're grateful for. This really helps you to change your perspective. So I really recommend it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to hand it over now to Natasha to do our closing. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Hi, thanks everyone for this really wonderful and important discussion. Thank you, Roni, and her PR person, Vanessa, Dr. Nicole Kamak, Dr. Linda Freed, and her entire PR team, and Dr. Amitha Kalashanjan. So it's been a great session today. I think it's been really important for what we've talked about, like collectively being there for one another and having that community. Remember, Mobilize Women will be taking place throughout the week, so mark your calendars for the next sessions, invite your friends, spread the word on social media using hashtag Mobilize Women, and show some love. These conversations matter more than ever before, and we want to reach as wide an audience as we can. After all, there's strength in numbers, and we believe we can change the world and do this together. So our next session will be tomorrow, called Human-Centric Policies and Cultures, featuring Kristen Kimmel, Head of Advisor Recruiting and Field Marketing at RBC Wealth Management, Ara Tucker, SVP, Head of Talent and Culture at Audible Incorporated, Kelly Mahon Tollier, Executive VP at Visa, and Courtney Connolly. And it will be taking place tomorrow at Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So don't forget to visit the experience page at mobilizewomen2020.com to get more insights and tools to reflect, learn, and turn today's discussion into action. So thanks again, everyone.